Hey what's up people, how's it going? This is Bharati. Welcome back to another video on ReactJS. So this is technically a continuation from our previous video on state hooks and hooks in general itself. We discussed in depth about what is hooks in ReactJS 16.8. From 16.8 there is a new concept called as hooks, and we discussed extreme in detail about that in the previous video. So if you haven't watched that, highly recommend you guys to go watch that video before jumping into this video. What's the topic for today? Today's topic is going to be about the effect hooks or the side effect hooks in ReactJS 16.8. Starting from 16.8, we are going to be using mostly these hooks to make our life so much easier. Technically, like I told you guys in the previous video itself, ReactJS components can become very complex when you are maintaining or when you are sending it across as a team building activity. So, for example, there is a team of 10 people and you write a component. Can another person reuse that? Technically, you cannot, because it's going to be really complex as to how the states and the properties are going to be flowing across the component. So, in order to cut that short, we came across or the ReactJS team did this hooks concept as part of the 16.8 release itself. And it's become very important, and also the ReactJS is officially moving towards the hooks concept rather than going with a class level component. So in this video we're going to be discussing about the effect hooks, which is nothing but a way of giving out the life cycle to the component itself. Technically we use effect hooks or the hooks itself in the function level component only. So with the effect hooks, we can give the function level component a life cycle to depend on. For example, let me create a simple application here. For example, I'll create a simple component called as function counter. So the function counter was a part of the previous video on the state hook, so where we did the function counter to change our counter itself with a button click, and it did change with just 10 lines of code. So that was really cool. So in this video we're going to be doing a similar fashion again. I'll do a function counter class, or let me change the name of the class to a very generic one. Let me call it a home app or something like that, so that we can play around with that without having to constantly think about the dependency. So this is going to be our most simplest function level component again. So the function level component is going to be, first of all, depending upon the use of the use state, which is nothing but where we're going to be storing our simple our states as well as the method that is going to affect the state. So that is the concept behind the use state. So we will do that, and we'll assign it to maybe change count or something like that. This is going to be the method name, which will officially change the count value, and we can directly use the use state and initialize the default value. I'll call it 0 by default. So this is going to be one. The next is going to be the return value itself, right? So we'll return a simple div tag, and the div tag is going to be, so div tag is have a simple p tag, and the p tag is going to say that count is equal to, we directly call the count here. So this is how simple it is, because we already have a function level component holding the life cycle. Count from the life cycle is going to be present here, and we can just put it out right here. So this is the simplest way of showing out the count. Now how are we going to increment that? We'll just do a simple another button here, and the button is going to complete with a button, and we just have to say increment the count. So this is going to be the name of the button, and on click here we're going to directly say just fire this arrow pointed up method, which is nothing but our change count method, and we're going to be passing the value of that. So we're just going to say just increment that. This is the simplest example we did see in the previous video itself. This is the use of states, right? Now if you run this application, I'll just I already have my server running, so when you run this application, it says increment the counter. So I'm going to increment the counter here. So I'm going to click, it's incrementing, right? Now what is the use of the component will unmount and component did mount? So what is the use of these two methods? These two methods are going to give the life cycle to the class level component. If you remember from the class level component video, we did see about how they are going to be used. We can directly map that with the use effect hook. So use effect hook is going to give us this ability to give a life cycle itself to the function level component. I'm just going to use the next one, which is the use effect. Make sure that you import that in the first place. And I'm going to directly create a simple method using the use effect. So we can directly do that using a simple point arrow function. So like this. So you can do this, and it need not have a name all the time. So what I'm going to do is just do console.log, and I'm going to just say this one, logging the count, and I'm going to just log the count. Okay, you can't log that like that. I'm just going to log the count, and this is my work. So I'm just saying that so this technically what we expect out of this is that it's going to be firing every time we change the count, right? So this is what is going to be the expectation. That's what the expectation was as well with the class level component. So when you go back here, and we'll just do F12 so that the console is up right now for us, and the logging the count is actually fired up. So as part of the initial mounting, so mounting is done, then you click the 1, it's saying the logging the count as 1. So technically what is happening is that every time the return is called, the use effect is also called by default. So technically what it's doing is that every time the methods or the components effect is mounted, the use effect is going to be fired and calling that as a part of lifecycle itself. So you can do a lot of things with this. As you saw, the logging the 0 came even before we click the button here. Technically that happens because we have called it as a startup or start of the method itself. So when the start of the method is there, we can do whatever you want to do. Technically, just take a simple example. We have a simplest social media application. So the social media application is going to have our users online, the messages that were present previously, all of that stored in a database. So when the user just going to logs in, automatically it populates all of that into our users simple dashboard. So if that is happening, how do you do that? How do you fire as part of that? You can just use a simple use effect here, call whatever methods or whatever APIs you want to call from here, and it's going to be fired. Now what happens if you what do you do if you want to do a cleanup here? The cleanup is technically how we created the component will unmount. So whenever the component unmounted, or whenever we said that we'll close this method, the cleanup actually happened. But here we're not going to do that. It's a little bit different than that. So what is going to happen is that we're going to fire this thing every single time the return is called. The use effect method is going to be called. It does not represent it either as a startup or as a cleanup. For example, let's say that there is another simple example where you want to click the logout button, and every data that is present as part of your social media account has to be again stored back to the DB. Now what ReactJS is going to do is that instead of clicking the logout button and storing the data, every single time you present or you put a data or type a message, it is going to call the use effect method. So use effect method is going to just populate something from the DB and show it to you, and also as a cleanup, it's going to store whatever data is present as part of your message back to the DB. It's going to continuously happen. So technically how the use effect method is going to be fired, so I can show you a simple example here. First example, first is going to be the count. So count is going to be 0 even before the user clicks on the button. So when you click the use effect method, first the render is called and the use effect method is called. So count now becomes 1. And technically again the render is called, the return method technically here, and the value changes to count equal to 2. So this is how it's going to be, right? This is how simple the use effect method is going to be for the positive scenario. So how do you call a cleanup here? Now the cleanup is going to be very simple. All you have to do is return some method as part of the use effect. So when you return some method as part of the use effect, or just put a return here, the ReactJS engine automatically understands that there has to be a cleanup that is going to happen, and it makes sure that that return is called after the return or after the render of the component here is going to be called. Let me show you guys a simple example of that as well. So how we're going to do that is directly call a return function. Let me call this a simple method. It need not be this method itself. Just do a simple cleanup as a method name. It need not be the name cleanup all the time. It could be any method. So what we're going to do now is that console.log fired after the count, and we will print the count. Technically I've constructed my cleanup to be like this. I've said that in the return cleanup, fired after the count is going to be printed. So technically what should happen is that first the logging the count should come, and we'll also additionally put a simple console.log here. Is it possible to put a console.log here? No, I would recommend you guys to do as it part of this. Okay, let's not confuse it. So what is going to happen is that only when the button is clicked, this fired after the count is going to be shown to us, because the render should be called Only after that the return is going to be called. Let's do the simple example again now on the screen. So it's not coming up for me. See, we can see that the fired after the count is not printed. So when you click increment the counter, it prints the fired after count and then also prints the next startup, which is logging the count as 1. So can you see the difference here very clearly? We are not seeing logging the count 0 fired after the count 1 because the button was clicked and the account got incremented. But what technically happens is that the first count is first going to be cleared out, or the cleanup is going to happen. Only after that the next one is going to be fired. So that is how simple the use effect method is going to do our startup and cleanup in a very simple way. We could extend this to any number of complex things as well. All you have to do is make sure that you have a simple method as part of the startup, and there is going to be return method as part of the cleanup. Also, there is another important scenario to consider. What if you don't want the cleanup to fire every single time? With the use effect method, every single time the return is going to be called, the cleanup and the startup is going to happen. But what if you don't want that to happen? That's a very valid scenario, right? How can you do that? That's another simple technique to do that. If you want to selectively fire only if the count is going to reach or the final value is going to reach at some point, all you have to just do a simple if block around this. We can see that if count is equal to 5 or triple equal to 5, only in that scenario what you're going to do is you're going to fire this thing up, return this value. So all is just to save, and we can see that logging the count is coming, logging in the count 3, 4 and the 5, and the next part it is firing, saying that the count is now 5 and I fired the cleanup. So we can do some things like this rather than going with a class level component and writing a component did mount and component will unmount every single time. So whenever you want to create that, you're going to create additional dependencies on the class level component itself. It's going to be very costly. So in order to reduce all of that, the ReactJS 16.8 onwards came up with the use effect hook, which is very simple. Again, we will be using more of that in the upcoming tutorial so that you guys can get very familiarized with that. But for this video, it's pretty much clear as to we did a simple example with the simple home app, and we did see how the logging is getting changed every single time this firing happens. So that's it for this video. I hope this 2 videos on the hooks was informative. If you did find it informative, you know what to do. Smash that subscribe and the like button as well. Let me meet the next video, something super cool with ReactJS. Until then, it's Bharat. Peace out. Have a super awesome day.